Shalom and welcome. This episode will cover Shem. After the global flood, there would have been an ice age and a stone age. The following video will briefly cover these events.
We can see on our planet 25 major features that can now be systematically explained as a consequence of a global flood that erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 30 trillion hydrogen bombs. This theory shows us just how rapidly major mountains form. It explains the coal, oil, and methane deposits, the rapid continental drift, and why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches, hundreds of canyons, and tens of thousands of volcanoes. This theory also explains the ice ages, and it gives the primary reason for global warming. It explains the formation of the layered strata in almost all fossils, the frozen mammoths, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. Surprisingly, it explains the origin of comets, of asteroids, and of meteorites.
According to Dr. Brown's theory, the ancient world that Noah lived in was very different from the earth we occupy today.
Noah and other pre-flood people probably lived on one very large supercontinent with lush vegetation, inland seas, and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, perhaps 6,000 feet high. Before the flood, about half the Earth's water was in interconnected chambers, about 10 miles below the Earth's surface. This formed a thin spherical shell, almost a mile thick. The pressure in the subterranean chamber had been increasing for centuries because the gravity of the sun and moon produced tides in the subterranean water that lifted and lowered the Earth's massive crust twice a day. This tidal pumping added gigantic amounts of energy to the subterranean water. This increasing pressure in the subterranean water steadily stretched the crust as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began as a microscopic crack that grew in both directions at almost 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched claw. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. The Bible even gives us a precise date, the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. Then it says, and the rain fell. The fountains of water jetted supersonically into and above the atmosphere. The spray from these enormous fountains produced torrential rain such as the earth has never experienced before or after. The supersonic fountains eroded the crumbling rock on both sides of the widening crack. This produced huge volumes of sediments that settled through the floodwaters, trapping and burying plants and animals, forming the fossil record. Eventually, the crack became so wide that the newly exposed floor of the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, with lubricating water still beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of approximately 40 to 50 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, and like a runaway crashing train, they compressed, crushed, buckled, and thickened, rising out of the floodwaters. This is why the major mountains are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. Today's major mountains were all pushed up in hours. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the mid-Atlantic ridge, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated.
This theory of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity appears to support the biblical story of the deluge in every detail.
Well, we're in the Mount Baker ski area near Mount Baker with Mount Shuckson in the background over here with this beautiful glacier on the top of it.
It's absolutely gorgeous. You don't see glaciers very often. They're kind of a unique thing, aren't they?
Well, you have to get up in the high mountains today in order to be able to see them. And they're much smaller than they used to be. Glaciers used to be much larger than this.
How big? Are we talking about just twice that size? Or?
In the past, glaciers have covered these mountains down even 3,000 feet lower than we have today. But even before that, ice sheets, which are basically glaciers on flat terrain, covered major areas of the world. For example, in North America, the ice sheets extended clear across Canada. They extended down into the United States. So that period of time when that much ice was here, that was the Ice Age.
Well, I think most people probably think if you just lower the temperature, you can get an ice age.
Well, it doesn't work that way because you got to get the water vapor from somewhere in order to produce the snow. So somewhere you have to have warm temperatures and you have to have cold temperatures. And we believe that's what happened during the Ice Age, that in the past that the oceans were much warmer and the continents were much colder, so that when water vapor that was evaporated out of the ocean was drifted over the cold continents, it then fell out as snow and ice.
As an atmospheric scientist, what do you see in the past that would have caused those unique conditions?
From my perspective, the Bible really gives us a clue as to what happened that caused the Ice Age. The Genesis flood was a magnificent, catastrophic, high-energy event, and it left the oceans warm. And it took about 1,000 years for the ocean to cool back down to the temperature that we have today, where it's uniform. But during that period of time, particularly right after the Genesis flood, when the oceans were the warmest, it produced a tremendous amount of heat and evaporated water into the atmosphere, which then fell as the snow and the ice on the continents, forming the Ice Age. So the Genesis flood was actually the cause of the Ice Age.
Larry, that sounds like we have some very, very unique conditions then.
Yes, they were. For example, we know that there were a lot of activity in the ocean. The plates that we are aware of on the surface of the Earth today, between those plates there were cracks where magma came up, hot magma from the mantle, spewed out on the bottom of the oceans and formed a gigantic mountain chain. And that 40,000-mile long mountain chain of hot magma, as it cooled, warmed up the ocean. And we have that information from estimates of sea surface temperature from seafloor sediment data. And the conventional community believes that as well.
So where does the Stone Age fit into the Bible? Was there ever a Stone Age? Well, right after the flood, Noah couldn't tell his grandson to go to the hardware store and get him a shovel. There were no hardware stores. They had a devastated society, folks. They got off the ark and everything outside is destroyed. You have to totally rebuild civilization. They had a Gilligan's Island situation. You got a bunch of smart people. Well, Gilligan's Island did not have a bunch of smart people, you know, maybe one. But they're on this devastated planet. So they're going to have to rebuild from scratch, and you're going to make stone tools. Because that's much quicker than digging the iron ore out, smelting it down, and making an iron tool. You know, by the time it takes you 3 weeks to make your axe, you're going to starve to death, okay? So they're going to make stone tools. And people that are driven out of society are going to travel around in small herds and packs following migrating animals, and they don't want to carry 50 pounds worth of stone tools with them. It's quicker to make your stone tools on the job site. You follow the mammoths until you catch up with them, or the buffalo, and then you quick make your tools, kill the buffalo or the mammoth, and you butcher it and leave your tools behind and go on someplace else. And then we today find these stone tools and say, wow, look at this Clovis point. Wow, perfectly shaped, perfectly balanced. This guy is smart. This is an advanced civilization. And then they find another arrowhead that looks kind of crude, you know, and it's not chipped very smoothly. And they say, wow, this guy's pre-human. You're not quite as smart. You know, maybe you got the whole wrong perspective on that. Maybe the one that looks kind of crude was found by a guy who's in a bigger hurry because the mammoth is getting away, okay? He just doesn't have time to sit there and play with his arrowhead for an hour. He wants to go shoot the thing now before it runs off. So it might be an example of how much time they have to spend on it. Not at all an example of their intelligence.
So as we can see, after the global flood, there would have been an Ice Age and a Stone Age. I have various ages for the Earth. 2 old Earth ages that place the age of the Earth over 100,000 years old, 2 median Earth ages that place the age of the Earth over 50,000 years old, and 2 young Earth ages that place the age of the Earth over 20,000 years old. Now, for my personal opinion for the age of the Earth, I have 3 simple theories for an old Earth, median Earth, and a young Earth. For an old Earth, creation was long before 100,000 years ago, and the flood was around 100,000 years ago. Basically, the post-flood event for an old Earth was 100,000 years ago, the mass extinction event. For a median Earth, creation was long before 20,000 years ago, and the flood was before the last glacial maximum. Basically, the post-flood event for a median Earth was 20,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum. For a young Earth, creation was long before 12,000 years ago, and the flood was before the young Darius. Basically, the post-flood event for a young Earth was 12,000 years ago, the young Darius. But within all of my timelines, these 2 eras remain, the Mesolithic era and the Neolithic era. Therefore, depending on which model people have chosen, I'll begin our journey with Shem and the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, since all of the timelines converge to those eras. With that being said, the Mesolithic and the Neolithic were important time periods for human development. But what was the Mesolithic and the Neolithic? According to History.com, titled "The Prehistoric Ages: How Humans Lived Before Written Records," it reads, during the Mesolithic period, about 10,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE, humans used small stone tools, now also polished and sometimes crafted with points and attached to antlers, bone, or wood, to serve as spears and arrows. They often lived nomadically in camps near rivers and other bodies of water. Agriculture was introduced during this period, which led to more permanent settlements and villages. Finally, during the Neolithic period, roughly 8,000 BCE to 3,000 BCE, ancient humans switched from hunter/gatherer mode to agriculture and food production. They domesticated animals and cultivated cereal grain. They used polished hand axes, adzeds for plowing and tilling the ground, and started to settle in the plains. Achievements were made not only in tools, but also in farming, home construction, and art, including pottery, sewing, and weaving. The Mesolithic and the Neolithic are important Stone Age periods in human history because during these periods, humans began to develop rapidly. And shortly after the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, we entered the Copper Age and the Bronze Age, which is the beginning and height of ancient civilizations such as Egypt and Africa, Sumer in Mesopotamia, Greece and the Balkans, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Indus Valley Civilization in South Asia, and the Akkadians in Mesopotamia, as well as many other Bronze Age civilizations, all owing their thanks to their ancient ancestors in the Mesolithic and Neolithic era. With that being said, we must ask this important question. What Stone Age population could best represent the earliest descendants of Shem? Basically, what Stone Age population could best represent the ancestors of Semites? Because remember, after the flood, there would have been an Ice Age and a Stone Age. So what ancient people could best represent these descendants of Shem during the Stone Age?